The salvage beacon pulsed through dead space, automated and alone. Chun-Wei ignored the flashing warnings on her scanner as she guided her small ship closer to the derelict. 3 years working the outer lanes had taught her that most warnings were just liability protection for corporations that didn't care if scavengers lived or died. The ship was Zenthri design, all curves and bioorganoplating that looked more grown than built. Chun had never seen one this close. The insectoid race kept to themselves mostly, trading through intermediaries and avoiding human space. This one had been drifting for months, according to the beacon signature. She maglocked to the hull and forced the airlock. Emergency lighting flickered on as she stepped inside, her suit reading breathable atmosphere, but contaminated. She kept her helmet sealed. The corridor bent in ways that hurt to look at, following alien logic about space and movement. Chun found the first body in what might have been a sleeping chamber. The Zenthri was curled in on itself, chitin dulled to gray. No obvious trauma. She moved deeper, finding more of the crew in similar states. 12 total. A merchant vessel probably, caught by something that killed quick to in the cargo hold. She found a reason. Pods lined the walls, each containing a larva about the size of a human child. Zenthri young, except these ones were wrong. Their carapaces showed dark veins, and the fluid in the pods had turned murky. Chin's scanner screamed contamination warnings. Plague. Some kind of species-specific pathogen that had torn through the adults but left the young in this suspended state, dying slow. The smart move was to leave. Report the ship, collect the finder's fee, let the authorities handle it. The Zenthri would send a recovery team. That was protocol. Chun looked at the pods again. 43 larvae, maybe a week left before the plague finished what it started. Recovery teams took months to mobilize, even in emergencies. By the time anyone official arrived, this hold would be full of dead children. She started running calculations. Her ship had a medical bay meant for one human. Basic but functional. The decontamination system could maybe handle 2 pods if she removed half her cargo. The Zenthri young would need specific conditions, though, temperature and humidity she couldn't guess at. Chin accessed the derelict's computer core, fighting through alien interface design until she found medical records. The translation was rough, but usable. She pulled up everything about Zenthri larvae care and emergency medicine. The species had redundant organs, different blood chemistry, but the basics of keeping someone alive translated well enough. She could save 2, maybe 3 if she pushed life support to the edge. The thought sat heavy. 2 out of 43 wasn't winning. It was just choosing who died now versus who died later. Chen had been making similar calculations her whole life. Growing up in the Manila arcology, you learned quick that you couldn't save everyone. Sometimes you couldn't save anyone. The math was always brutal, but 2 was more than 0. Chun hauled the first pod to her ship, muscles burning under the weight, even in low gravity. Her cargo bay was full of industrial plastics worth maybe 10,000 credits. She dumped half of it into space and started securing the pod. The medical bay took the second one. For the third, she stripped her own sleeping quarters down to bare walls and plumbing point 3 pods. 3 chances, the derelict's computer yielded more data. Plague vector, transmission method, timeline. The adults had been dead about 6 days. The larvae had maybe 8 left. Chun programmed her ship's medical system with every parameter she could find. Knowing she was working with incomplete information and equipment never meant for this, her ship pulled away from the derelict. Chun sent a priority message to the Zenthri embassy. Coordinates, situation report, the works. She didn't mention the 3 pods in her cargo bay. That conversation could wait until she knew if any of them would survive the next week. The first day was monitoring. Her ship's computer translated vital signs into approximations she could understand. All 3 larvae held stable, their pods maintaining the careful balance of temperature and nutrients. Chun slept in the cockpit, surrounded by screens showing readouts she only half understood. Day 2 brought the first crisis. The larva in her sleeping quarters started showing signs of distress. Temperature spiking, fluid clouding faster. Chun cross-referenced symptoms against the medical database. finding matches for secondary infection. The plague had weakened something, letting other problems in. She spent 4 hours in a clean suit, working with equipment meant for human medicine on an alien child, adjusting fluid composition, administering what she hoped were antibiotics. Her hands shook as she worked, knowing one wrong move could kill what she was trying to save. The larva stabilized just before dawn. Chen sat on the floor of her cockpit, exhausted and terrified, watching 3 sets of vital signs hold steady. Somewhere behind her, 3 Zenthri children floated in pods, kept alive by human stubbornness and salvaged medical data. She had maybe 6 days to figure out how to keep them that way. 6 days before help arrived, or everything failed. The math was still brutal, but Chun had never been good at walking away from bad odds. Growing up in Manila taught you that too. Sometimes the only choice was to try anyway. The distress call came through in the middle of third shift. Ravi Patel was 3 hours into a maintenance check on the agricultural decks when the communication system crackled to life with broken transmissions and universal panic codes. He dropped his tools and ran to the nearest terminal. The translation was fragmented but clear enough. A colony ship had hit something in the asteroid belt. Not a collision, but an attack. Pirates maybe, or some automated defense system left over from the old wars. 20,000 colonists drifting toward the belt's dense core, life support failing, engines dead. Ravi accessed the trajectory data. His freighter was the closest ship by 3 days. The colony ship had maybe 12 hours before they hit the first major asteroid field. After that, the math turned grim. His crew was 4 people, including himself. The freighter was designed to haul grain and processed food between stations, not conduct rescue operations. They had 1 shuttle rated for 10 passengers and a cargo bay that could theoretically hold people if they didn't mind standing room only and minimal life support. 20,000 people. For crew members, 12 hours, Ravi started making calls. His pilot was asleep, but answered on the second ring. His engineer and medical officer were playing cards in the rec room. He gave them the short version and asked for the impossible. Could they do it? His engineer ran numbers out loud. They could pack maybe 800 people into the cargo bays if they vented half their current load and rigged emergency atmosphere. The shuttle could make maybe 40 trips if they burned it hard and ignored every safety protocol. That was 10,000 people moved if everything went perfect and nothing broke down. Still 10,000 short. His medical officer pointed out they had medical supplies for a crew of 4. Enough bandages and medication for maybe 50 people if they ration hard. 20,000 colonists probably meant thousands injured in whatever had disabled their ship. His pilot said they could reach the colony ship in 9 hours if they burned through fuel reserves meant for 6 months. Getting back to the nearest station would take creative navigation and a lot of luck. The numbers didn't work. They never did in situations like this. Ravi had grown up in the Mumbai coastal zones, watching rescue workers make the same calculations during monsoon season. Save what you can reach. Let the math make the hard choices. It was practical and efficient, and it felt like dying inside every time that he told his crew to prep for rescue operations anyway. The freighter burned hard toward the colony ship, eating through fuel at rates that made Ravi's financial officer instinct scream. They reached the disabled vessel with 90 minutes to spare before the asteroid field turned deadly. The colony ship was a massive cylinder, dark except for emergency lighting, tumbling slow on its long axis. Ravi opened communication channels and got chaos in return. The colony ship's crew was dead or unconscious. The colonists were mostly civilians, families headed for a new world with children and elderly and everyone in between. They were terrified and confused and looking for someone to tell them what to do. That he became that person by default. Ravi organized them through the communication system. Priority groups based on medical need and mobility. Children first, then injured, then everyone else. His shuttle pilot started running loops, pulling people off the dying ship 40 at a time. His engineer rigged the cargo bays for maximum capacity, sacrificing comfort and safety margins for pure volume. The colonists came in waves. Parents clutching children, elderly helped by younger colonists, injured on improvised stretchers. They filled the cargo bays past capacity and kept coming. Ravi's medical officer set up triage in the main corridor, working with whatever supplies the colonists had brought and making do when that ran out 0.6 hours in. They hit 10,000 rescued. The freighter's life support was screaming warnings about oxygen levels and waste recycling. The cargo bays were packed so tight people had to take turns sitting down. The shuttle was showing stress fractures from repeated hard burns. Ravi did the math again. Another 8,000 colonists on the colony ship. Maybe 4 hours before the asteroids turned the disabled vessel into scrap. His ship was already past safety limits. Taking on more people meant risking everyone already aboard. The colony ship sent another message. Children's voices this time, asking if someone was coming for them. Ravi authorized another shuttle run. His pilot came back on communication looking exhausted and determined. The shuttle could probably handle another 20 runs before something critical failed. Maybe 30 if they got lucky. His engineer had an idea about using the cargo containers as external pods. Seal people inside, maglock them to the hull, and hope the containers held pressure long enough to reach a station. IT violated every safety regulation ever written. It might work. They tried it. The next 4 hours were organized chaos. Shuttle runs continued. Cargo containers were hastily modified and filled with colonists who trusted their lives to Ravi's crew and improvised engineering. The freighter's hull became studded with containers like strange fruit, each holding 50 or 60 people breathing recycled air and praying. When the colony ship entered the asteroid field, Ravi's freighter was pulling away with 19,200 colonists aboard or attached. 800 people went down with their ship. Ravi watched it happen on the scanners, unable to do anything but witness. The journey to the nearest station took 6 days instead of the normal 3. The freighter limped along on emergency power and fuel so low they were practically coasting. The colonists in the cargo containers took shifts, rotating into the warmer interior bays to avoid hypothermia. Medical emergencies were handled with shared supplies and knowledge crowdsourced from anyone with relevant training. That Ravi's crew ran themselves to exhaustion, keeping everything functional. His engineers slept in 3-hour shifts next to the reactor. His pilot navigated on stimulants and determination. His medical officer treated everything from broken bones to heart attacks with whatever materials came at hand. They made it. 19,200 people delivered to the station alive. Ravi filed the reports, coordinated with the colonial authorities, and helped process the survivors through emergency housing. His freighter would need months of repairs. The financial loss was catastrophic that he sat in his quarters afterward, looking at the final counts. 800 people dead. 19,200 saved. The math said they did good. The math said they saved almost everyone. The math didn't care that Ravi could still hear those children's voices asking if someone was coming for them. The prison transport shook as it dropped through Otmo, and Marcus Chun kept his eyes on the viewport rather than looking at the restraints around his wrists. Below them stretched red desert broken by ancient canyons and the kind of landscape that looked beautiful right up until it killed you. Talvis Prime. Former mining colony turned into a dumping ground for the galaxy's unwanted. Humans mostly. The Galactic Council had very specific ideas about what crimes warranted exile versus incarceration, and humanity's tendency toward violence had filled this planet with people the Council considered too dangerous for civilized space. The transport hit ground hard enough to rattle teeth. Guards in full armor herded the new arrivals toward the settlement, such as it was. Prefab structures clustered around the old mining complex, surrounded by walls that looked like they'd been reinforced a dozen times with whatever materials were available. Beyond the walls, the desert stretched empty and hostile. An older woman met them at the gate. Human, maybe 60, with scars that spoke of hard years and harder choices. She introduced herself as Governor Yuki and gave them the short version of how things worked. The council supplied food and basic medical supplies every 6 months. Everything else was on them. There were rules enforced by the community. Break them, and you either got locked up or got exiled beyond the walls. Past that, people mostly left each other alone. She looked at the newest batch of arrivals with eyes that had seen this before. 43 people, 31 human, 12 other species, all guilty of violent crimes by council standards, which meant everything from actual murder to defending themselves against alien attackers who had council connections. Marcus had gotten exile for killing a Vraxian merchant who thought buying a transport contract gave him ownership of a human crew. The trial had lasted 3 hours. The sentence was permanent. The first week was learning the settlement's geography. The main complex held communal areas and shared resources. Housing was assigned based on availability and willingness to contribute. There was a greenhouse powered by the remains of the mining operations reactor, a workshop where people built whatever they needed from salvage, a medical bay run by a former trauma surgeon who'd been exiled for operating on wounded humans during a border conflict. Marcus ended up in the workshop. He'd been an engineer before everything went wrong, and the settlement always needed people who could keep aging equipment functional. The work was familiar enough to be meditative. Fixing water recyclers and patching environmental suits gave him something to do besides think about the life he'd lost. 3 months in, the real problem started that the ship landed beyond visual range. Not the council supply ship, something smaller and faster. The perimeter alerts went off just after dark, and Marcus joined the response team because everyone took their turn on defense. They found the raiders 2 miles from the settlement. 20 aliens in military-grade armor with weapons that outclassed anything the exiles had access to. Slavers, one of the scouts, identified them. Species that made profit-selling workers to colonies that didn't ask questions about where the labor came from. The smart move was to retreat, lock down the settlement, hope the walls held, and wait for the raiders to get bored and leave. There were 200 people living here, women and children included. Marcus had seen what slavers did to prisoners. Governor Yuki called for volunteers. 47 people grabbed whatever weapons they could find and headed into the desert. Marcus went with them, carrying a rifle that was older than he was and ammunition rationed by the round. The exiles had the terrain advantage. They'd been living in this desert for years, knew every canyon and dry wash. The raiders had training and equipment, but they were hunting for easy prey, not expecting organized resistance. The fight was brutal and fast. Marcus and 5 others set up in a canyon pass and waited. When the raiders came through, they hit them with everything they had. Rifle fire and improvised explosives made from mining equipment. 3 raiders went down in the first 30 seconds. The rest scattered and returned fire. Marcus took a shot to the shoulder that burned like acid. He kept firing anyway. Next to him, a woman named Sarah, who'd been exiled for attacking her corporate overseer, put 3 rounds into a raider's faceplate at close range. The raider went down spraying blood that wasn't red. The canyon turned into a killing ground. The exiles used every dirty trick they knew, because that's what you did when the alternative was slavery or death. Fire lanes and crossfire. Retreat and ambush. Fighting like cornered animals, because that's exactly what they were. When it was over, 18 raiders were dead. 2 had fled back to their ship. The exiles had lost 12 people, including Governor Yuki, who'd taken a plasma round to the chest, leading a flanking attack. Marcus sat in the sand afterward, bleeding from 3 wounds and trying to process what they'd just done. Around him, the other survivors were in similar states. Some crying, some silent. Sarah was throwing up next to a dead raider. The settlement buried their dead the next day. Governor Yuki got a marker made from polished stone. The others got what ceremony people could manage while dealing with shock and grief. They burned the raiders and scattered the ashes in the desert that a week later, another ship approached. Not raiders this time, but a Galactic Council patrol. They landed outside the settlement and demanded answers. Someone had reported the unauthorized combat. The council wanted to know why exiled criminals were fighting organized battles with military-grade weapons. The new governor, a man named Torres who'd been exiled for refusing to abandon wounded soldiers during a retreat, met with the council representative. Marcus listened from the gate as Torres explained what had happened. Defended themselves. Protected their community. The kind of thing that should have been understandable to anyone with basic empathy. The council representative listened and then informed them that self-defense was not permitted for exile populations. The raiders had been operating under questionable legal authority, but they had been legally registered entities. The exiles were criminals. The distinction mattered under council law. Marcus felt something break inside him listening to this. They'd fought and bled and died to protect their community, and the council was treating it like a regulatory violation. Torres asked what punishment the council had in mind. The representative said they were debating. Options range from sanctions on supply deliveries to relocating the entire settlement to a more restrictive facility. Marcus stepped forward before Torres could respond. He looked at the council representative and spoke clearly. The raiders had come for slaves. The exiles had defended themselves. If that was illegal under council law, then council law could go to hell. They'd do it again if they had to. Every time, the representative looked at Marcus like he was examining something toxic. Then they returned to their ship without another word. 3 months later, the council supply ship arrived on schedule. Full delivery, no sanctions. Included in the cargo was a message. The raider incident had been reviewed. The slaver's license had been revoked for operating in prohibited territory. The matter was considered closed. Marcus read the message twice, trying to understand. Sarah, reading over his shoulder, laughed bitterly. The council couldn't admit the exiles had been right to defend themselves. But they also couldn't ignore that forcing them to submit to slavers looked bad. So they found a technicality and moved on. That IT wasn't justice. It was barely acknowledgement, but it was something. Marcus folded the message and went back to work in the shop, fixing the systems that kept their community alive. Outside the walls, the desert stretched empty and beautiful and deadly. Inside, 200 exiles lived and worked and defended each other. Not because council law said they could, because being human meant making those choices anyway. The research station floated in high orbit above a gas giant that nobody had bothered to name. Dr. Kenji Sato watched the swirling cloud patterns through the observation deck and tried not to think about how far from Earth he actually was. 14 months by jump ship, far enough that real-time communication was impossible and even message drones took weeks. He was here studying the native life forms that inhabited the giant's upper atmosphere. Vast creatures that fed on complex hydrocarbons and reproduced through methods nobody fully understood. The Galactic Science Council had assigned him here because humans were expendable for dangerous research, and studying life forms in crushing gravity and corrosive atmosphere definitely qualified as dangerous. Kenji shared the station with 6 other researchers. Frevelian scientists built like walking tanks with redundant organs and armor plating. 2 Sethic observers, fragile crystalline beings who communicated through light pulses and kept to themselves. Nobody talked to Kenji unless they needed something, which was fine. He did his job, collected his data, and tried to make discoveries that might matter. The creatures were beautiful in their own way. Some measured kilometers across, drifting through the atmosphere like living ships. They communicated through patterns of bioluminescence that created cascading light shows across the cloud layers. Kenji had spent months documenting their behavior and trying to understand their social structure. Then the juveniles started dying. IT started slow. 1 or 2 smaller creatures going dark and falling toward the giant's crushing depths. Then more. Within 2 weeks, Kenji was documenting juvenile deaths at a rate that suggested something catastrophic. The adults continued their normal patterns, seemingly unaware or unconcerned that their young were dying en masse. He brought the data to the senior Vrelian researcher, a scarred veteran of multiple expeditions. The Vrelian examined the numbers and declared it a natural population fluctuation. These things happen with alien life. The council wasn't interested in intervening with natural processes, Kenji argued. The die-off rate was too high to be natural. Something had changed in the environment. Maybe contamination from the research station or some disease vector they'd accidentally introduced. They had a responsibility to investigate. The Vrelian told him to focus on his assigned research and stop anthropomorphizing the creatures. They were animals, not people. Their deaths were scientifically interesting, but not tragic. Kenji went back to his observations and watched more juveniles die. He started running unauthorized scans, trying to find the cause. His equipment was limited to what the council had authorized for his use, which wasn't much. Humans got basic tools and minimal resources. The assumption was they'd make do or fail trying that he made 2.3 weeks of analysis reveal the problem. A bacterial bloom in the giant's upper atmosphere, concentrated in the feeding zones where juveniles spent most of their time. The adults fed deeper where the bacteria couldn't survive. The juveniles were getting infected faster than their immune systems could adapt. Without intervention, the entire generation would be dead within a month. Kenji brought the data to the research team, showed them the bacterial analysis, the infection patterns, the timeline. He'd even found a potential solution. The station's waste processing system produced compounds that were toxic to the bacteria. They could seed the juvenile feeding zones and clear the infection before it killed everything. The Vrelian researcher refused. Intervening in natural processes violated council guidelines. The bacterial bloom was part of the ecosystem. Saving the juveniles would disrupt the natural order. The decision was final. Kenji sat in his quarters that night and tried to accept it. He was one human on a station full of aliens who didn't care if he agreed with their choices. He could file a protest that would take weeks to reach anyone who might listen and months to generate a response. By then, every juvenile would be dead, or he could do something about it. The waste processing system was in the maintenance section. Kenji had access because someone needed to handle basic repairs, and the other researchers considered maintenance work beneath them. He spent 2 days rerouting the system, building release containers from spare parts, and calculating dispersal patterns. Down on the 3rd day, he loaded the containers onto one of the research drones and programmed it to drop the treatment compounds into the juvenile feeding zones. The drone launched at night when the other researchers were in their rest cycles. Kenji watched from the observation deck as it descended into the atmosphere and began its work. The bacterial bloom started dying within hours. Kenji tracked the progress through his sensors, watching the infection clear from the feeding zones. Juveniles that had been showing symptoms began to recover. New deaths stopped. Within a week, the population had stabilized. The Vrelian researcher noticed something was different and ran diagnostics. The compounds in the atmosphere didn't match natural patterns. Someone had intervened. They checked the maintenance logs and found Kenji's authorization codes all over the drone launch system. The confrontation happened in the common area with all the researchers present. The Vrelian was furious. Kenji had violated direct orders and council guidelines. He contaminated a natural ecosystem with human waste products. The scientific integrity of their entire mission was compromised. Kenji didn't apologize. He laid out the data, showing the bacterial bloom was not natural but caused by trace elements from the research station itself. They'd accidentally poisoned the feeding zones. His intervention had corrected their mistake. The juveniles were alive because he'd acted. The Vrelian dismissed this as speculation and human emotionalism. Kenji was confined to quarters pending a council investigation. The message drone was sent immediately. Kenji's career was effectively over. He sat in his quarters for 3 weeks waiting for the council's response. Through his window, he could see the juveniles thriving in the cleared feeding zones. Their bioluminescent patterns matched the adults now, complex and beautiful. A generation saved by human stubbornness and waste processing. The council's response arrived with surprising speed. Kenji was removed from the research team effective immediately. His findings were under review. He would be transferred to a different assignment pending disciplinary action. The message was coldly professional and made no mention of the juveniles. The transfer ship arrived 2 weeks later. Kenji packed his minimal belongings and prepared to leave. The other researchers ignored him completely. The Vrelian researcher made a point of deleting all of Kenji's work from the station computers, declaring it compromised data. As the transfer ship pulled away from the station, Kenji looked back at the gas giant one last time. The juveniles were visible through the clouds, their lights creating patterns across the atmosphere. A whole generation that would grow up and reproduce and continue their species. The council would never acknowledge what he'd done. The scientific community would treat him as a cautionary tale about emotional attachment and protocol violation. The pilot of the transfer ship, an older human woman named Rodriguez, glanced back at him from the controls. She'd reviewed his file before pickup. She knew why he was being transferred. After a long silence, she spoke. The council had reassigned him to a station studying deep ocean life on a water world. It was considered punishment duty. Dangerous environment, minimal support, high chance of mission failure. The kind of posting they gave to humans they wanted to fail. Rodriguez looked at the gas giant in the view screen and then at Kenji. She said the water world had been showing signs of environmental stress in the native populations. The council team there was documenting it as natural phenomenon. They'd probably appreciate someone who understood how to actually solve problems instead of just watching things die. Kenji smiled for the first time in weeks. He asked Rodriguez if she knew what kind of problems the water world was facing. She said the reports mentioned coral-like structures dying off and juvenile aquatic life, showing signs of unknown illness. Real mystery, the kind that needed someone stubborn enough to ignore orders. The ship jumped toward the water world, carrying a disgraced researcher and his complete lack of respect for letting nature take its course when nature's course involved preventable death. Behind them, the juveniles danced in the clouds, alive and thriving. The council would write it up as a natural recovery. The Vrelian would publish papers about ecosystem resilience. Kenji would move on to the next crisis. It was enough. The translation algorithms struggled with the message, but the meaning came through clear enough. Something was killing ships in the outer reaches, and the Galactic Merchant Guild wanted it stopped. They were offering contracts to anyone willing to investigate. Pay was good. Survival odds were terrible. Dakota Webb read the posting 3 times before accepting. She needed the credits and had a ship fast enough to run if things went bad. Her vessel, the Wandering Star, wasn't much to look at, but it had engines she'd rebuilt herself and more escape options than most people knew existed. The outer reaches were exactly what they sounded like. The edge of known space where trade routes got thin and law got thinner. Dakota had been working these lanes for 5 years, hauling cargo that other people didn't want to touch and asking no questions about origins or destinations. It paid better than legitimate work and suited her temperament. She reached the investigation zone 3 days after accepting the contract. The debris field was impressive. Pieces of at least 6 ships scattered across an area the size of a small moon. All of them showed similar damage patterns. Hull breaches that looked almost surgical. Life support systems destroyed, but cargo holds left mostly intact, like something had killed the crews and left the goods floating. Dakota collected samples and scanned for energy signatures. Standard pirate tactics usually involved disabling ships and stealing cargo. This was something else, more methodical, more interested in killing than profit. The first attack came while she was examining a piece of hull plating. Something hit the Wandering Star hard enough to trigger every alarm on board. Dakota was running for the cockpit before conscious thought caught up to instinct. She saw it on the sensors before her eyes could process what they were showing. Organic. Massive. Moving through vacuum like it was swimming through water. The thing measured maybe 30 meters long, all writhing appendages and bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. One of its limbs had punched through the star's outer hull like it was tissue paper. Dakota burned the engines and pulled away hard. The creature released its grip and followed. Fast. Too fast for something that size. She pushed the star to maximum burn and headed for the nearest asteroid cluster. If she could lose it in the rocks, maybe she'd live long enough to warn someone. The creature stayed on her. Every evasive maneuver, every course change. It matched her like it could read her mind. Dakota started cycling through every trick she knew. Debris clouds, radiation bursts, random vector changes. Nothing worked. She was 3 minutes from empty fuel tanks when she noticed something odd. The creature wasn't trying to destroy her ship. It was hurting her. Every attack pushed her in a specific direction, away from the trade routes, toward empty space. Dakota stopped running and killed the engines. The creature slowed as well, maintaining distance but not attacking. They floated in vacuum regarding each other. Woman and alien predator caught in mutual evaluation. She opened communication channels on every frequency. No response. Tried basic mathematical sequences. Still nothing. started cycling through cultural greetings from every species in the database. The creature remained silent, but didn't leave. Dakota pulled up the data she'd collected from the debris field and started analyzing attack patterns. The destroyed ships had all been cargo haulers. Big and slow, easy prey. But they'd also all been carrying similar cargo manifests. Industrial chemicals, heavy metals, radioactive waste. The kind of stuff that civilized species dumped in the outer reaches because disposal was expensive and enforcement was minimal. She checked her own cargo hold. Medical supplies and food shipments. Nothing toxic. Nothing that would poison an environment. The creature was still watching her. Dakota made a choice that was either brilliant or suicidal. She opened her cargo bay doors and used the manipulation arms to show the contents. Crates clearly labeled with medical symbols and food icons. She moved slowly, broadcasting on every channel that she was unarmed and non-hostile. The creature moved closer. Its appendages reached toward the open bay, but didn't enter. Dakota waited, barely breathing. After what felt like hours, but was probably seconds, the creature withdrew. It moved away from the wandering star, heading back toward the debris field. Dakota watched it go and then started running every scan she had. The creature's biosignature was consistent with species native to gas-giant atmospheres, similar to what she'd heard about from research stations, but much larger. This one was adapted for vacuum. Probably lived in the asteroid belt or used it for hunting grounds. She plotted the locations of destroyed ships against known dumping coordinates. Perfect overlap. Every ship that had been killed had been carrying toxic waste into the creature's territory. The creature wasn't a random predator. It was defending its home from poisoners. Dakota filed a report with the Merchant Guild, including all her data and analysis. She recommended marking the area as protected territory and establishing new dumping protocols. The response came back within a day. The guild thanked her for the information and offered a bonus for completing the investigation. They also informed her that economic analysis showed rerouting dumping operations would cost more than occasional ship losses. The area would remain open for commerce. Ships were advised to improve defensive capabilities. The matter was closed. Dakota read the response 3 times and felt something cold settle in her chest. They knew. The guild knew what was happening and had decided that killing a creature defending its home was cheaper than proper waste disposal. She could accept the bonus and move on. Take her credits and find another contract. That's what most people would do. That's what she'd done most of her life. Don't get involved. Don't make it personal. Survive and move forward. Instead, Dakota filed a second report. This one went to the Galactic Environmental Council. She included all her scans of the creature, the debris field analysis, and the guild's response. She attached documentation showing the dumping operations violated 3 different treaties on environmental preservation. She made it official and public and completely destroyed her standing with the Merchant Guild. The Environmental Council responded within a week. They were launching a full investigation. Inspectors were being dispatched to the outer reaches. All dumping operations in the affected area were suspended pending review. They thanked Dakota for bringing this to their attention and offered her a position as a field investigator. The Merchant Guild blacklisted her that same day. Dakota's name went on every list that mattered. No legitimate shipping company would hire her. No station would offer her docking priority. She'd made herself unemployable in civilized space by caring about a creature that couldn't thank her and probably didn't know she existed. Rodriguez, the old pilot from Kenji's story that Dakota had heard about through the grapevine of disgraced humans, sent her a message. Just a set of coordinates and a note saying she'd heard Dakota might be looking for work. The coordinates led to an independent operation hiring people who had ethics problems with the way the galaxy ran things. Dakota set course and never looked back. The wandering star headed toward the coordinates, carrying a pilot who'd chosen protecting a creature's home over her career. Behind her, the Environmental Council was tearing apart dumping contracts and establishing protected zones. The creature swam through its asteroid field, safe from poisoned ships. The Merchant Guild would find new dumping grounds and new ways to cut costs. The system would keep running on profit over principle. But this time, in this place, someone had stood up and said no. Someone had decided that preventing death mattered more than convenience. Dakota would probably never see the creature again. She destroyed her reputation for something that would never know she'd helped. Most people would call that stupid. Dakota called it being human. Not the way the galaxy defined the word, as violent or emotional or unreliable, but the way that actually mattered. Seeing something wrong and fixing it even when it cost everything. The star jumped toward the coordinates, toward whatever came next. Dakota was unemployable, blacklisted, and completely at peace with her choices. She'd saved a life, maybe more than one if the creature had young. The math didn't balance economically, but it balanced in the ways that let her sleep at night. That was enough. The synthesis facility floated in deep space, deliberately built far from any inhabited system. Lydia Hart worked third shift in the observation wing, monitoring experiments that the Galactic Council had deemed too dangerous for populated areas. Her job was simple: watch the sensors, record data, report anomalies, never interfere. The facility studied consciousness transfer between species. The theory was that minds could be moved between bodies, allowing the Council's elite to extend their lives by jumping into younger hosts. The practice required test subjects who wouldn't be missed. Humans qualifia para fauli. Low status, high population, minimal legal protection. Lydia had taken the job because it paid 3 times standard rate and asked no questions about her background. She'd left Earth running from debts and bad decisions. Working for morally questionable science was better than jail. That's what she told herself during the first month. The test subjects arrived in batches. Convicted criminals mostly, sold to the facility by justice systems that found this more economical than incarceration. They went into the transfer chambers aware of what was happening. Some fought. Most didn't. By the time they reached the facility, fighting had usually been beaten out of them. Lydia watched through reinforced glass as the scientists worked. The process was brutal. Ripping consciousness from one brain and forcing it into another rarely worked cleanly. Test subjects screamed as their minds were torn apart and reassembled wrong. The lucky ones died fast. The rest lived in bodies that rejected them, going mad as their sense of self shattered. After 3 months, Lydia had witnessed 47 attempts. 0 successes. 47 people destroyed for research that went nowhere. The head scientist, a Krell with philosophy degrees and 0 empathy, considered this acceptable loss. Each failure provided data. Each data point brought them closer to success. Lydia filed her reports and tried not to think about the faces. The people who'd gone into those chambers had been criminals, but they'd been people. Someone's child or parent or friend. The galaxy had decided their lives were worth sacrificing for progress. Lydia had decided her paycheck was worth participating. The change started with Subject 48. Her name was Maria Torres, former smuggler convicted of transporting illegal medical supplies to colonies the Council had quarantined. She'd been sentenced to 30 years or medical research participation. She'd chosen research because 30 years in Council prisons was slow death anyway. Maria went into the transfer chamber without fighting. Lydia watched the readouts as the process began. Brain activity spiking, consciousness fragmenting, the usual pattern of failure starting. Then something different happened. The transfer stabilized. For 30 seconds, maybe 40, Maria's consciousness existed in 2 bodies simultaneously. The readouts showed coherent thought patterns in both the original and host body. It was working. The scientists were celebrating the breakthrough they'd been destroying lives to achieve. Then Maria started screaming in both bodies. The consciousness wasn't merging with the host. It was being torn between them, being split and stretched and broken across 2 nervous systems that couldn't fully synchronize. The coherent patterns collapsed into chaos. Both bodies seized. The scientists terminated the experiment. Both bodies survived, but what came back wasn't Maria anymore. 2 breathing bodies with fragmented minds that couldn't form complete thoughts. Aware enough to know something was wrong, but not enough to understand what. They'd created 2 living hells from one person. The head scientist declared it progress. Partial transfer was better than no transfer. With more refinement, they could achieve full consciousness migration. More test subjects were requested. The work would continue. Lydia sat in the observation wing after shift ended and stared at her hands. 48 people. 48 lives fed into a machine that broke them for science. She'd watched it happen and filed reports and collected her pay. She'd told herself it wasn't her responsibility. She was just observing, just recording data. Maria was still alive in both bodies. Trapped, aware, unable to die because the facility kept them on life support for continued study. Lydia could see them on the medical monitors. 2 hearts beating, 2 sets of brain waves showing distress. One shattered consciousness experiencing hell twice over. Does she'd seen enough? Lydia accessed the facility's security systems with codes she collected over months of watching admin passwords and maintenance routines. The observation wing had minimal security because nobody expected trouble from the human monitor. She disabled the cameras and locked the blast doors. The medical bay was 3 sections over. Lydia moved fast, knowing she had maybe 20 minutes before someone noticed the security blackout. She found Maria's bodies in separate containment units. Both were sedated, but the brain activity showed they were still aware underneath the drugs. Still suffering. Lydia overrode the containment locks and accessed the life support systems. There was no way to fix what had been done. The fragmentation was permanent. The only mercy left was ending it. She set the systems to full sedation and then shut down life support to both units. Maria died quickly. Both bodies stopped showing brain activity within minutes. Lydia stood there watching the monitors go flat and trying to find some satisfaction in having stopped the suffering. All she felt was rage. She moved through the medical bay systematically. Every test subject still on life support. Every partial consciousness kept alive for study. 19 bodies total, containing fragments of 14 people. Lydia gave them the same mercy. Full sedation followed by peaceful shutdown. It took 30 minutes. By the end, the medical bay was silent except for flatline alarms. Lydia expected security to burst in any second. She'd accepted arrest as inevitable. Instead, the door opened quietly and 5 other staff members entered. 2 humans from maintenance, 3 aliens from various departments. All of them had been working at the facility for months. All of them had been watching the same horrors. The lead maintenance tech, a woman named Susan, looked at the silent monitors and then at Lydia. She said the security blackout would last another hour if they were lucky. The facility had escape pods rated for 6 people. The nearest inhabited system was 8 days away. They could make it if they left immediately. One of the aliens, a Tority with ethical objections that had gotten her assigned to deep space, said she'd rigged the reactor to overload on a timer. The facility would destroy itself completely. No survivors, no data, no evidence of what had happened here. Just an unfortunate accident in deep space. Lydia looked at the others and understood. They'd all been waiting for someone to make the first move. All of them had been gathering codes and access permissions and exit strategies. All of them had been looking for the courage to act. She'd given them that by going first, they took 1 escape pod. The other 5 they sabotaged to ensure nobody else could leave. As the pod accelerated away from the facility, Lydia watched the structure shrink behind them. 90 minutes after they launched, the reactor went critical. The facility vaporized in a brief flash that would be recorded as equipment failure in council logs that 62 people died in that flash. 58 scientists and staff who'd been participating in consciousness murder. 4 test subjects still waiting for their turn in the transfer chambers. Lydia had killed them all as surely as if she'd pulled a trigger. She tried to feel guilty about it. The escape pod reached the inhabited system 9 days later, fuel depleted and life support running on fumes. They broadcast distress signals and prepared stories about the accident. The council investigators took their statements and filed reports. The facility was marked as a tragic loss. Research delayed, but not abandoned. Another facility would be built. More test subjects would be acquired. Lydia and the others scattered to different systems after the investigation concluded. She ended up on a frontier station doing maintenance work for barely enough credits to eat. Former facility workers were blacklisted from premium positions. Nobody wanted scientists who destroyed a billion-credit research station. Rodriguez found her 3 months later. The old pilot had a network now. People who'd chosen ethics over advancement. People who'd burned their careers doing the right thing. She offered Lydia transport to a colony that needed people willing to stand up for others. Lydia accepted. She boarded Rodriguez's ship with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of flatline alarms. Maria was dead. The others were dead. 62 people had died because Lydia decided that some research shouldn't happen regardless of the potential benefits. The galaxy would continue its experiments. Other facilities in other deep space locations. Other test subjects who nobody would miss. The Council would keep pushing boundaries and breaking people and calling it progress. Lydia couldn't stop that. She could only stop her participation in it. The ship jumped toward the colony. Behind them, the Council was already building a replacement facility. Ahead, somewhere in the unknown, people were doing the same work. Choosing mercy over profit. Choosing action over observation. Building something different from the bottom up. Lydia had killed 62 people to save 14 fragments of consciousness from ongoing torture. The math would never balance. The guilt would never fade. But she'd sleep knowing that she'd finally stopped being complicit. Finally chosen to act instead of observe. That was what being human meant in the end. Not the violence the galaxy expected. Not the emotionalism they dismissed. But the absolute refusal to accept that some suffering was necessary for progress. The stubborn, destructive, beautiful insistence that every life mattered and some prices were too high to pay. The galaxy would learn that lesson eventually. Until then, humans would keep teaching it one burn career at a time.